Jane Elliott's blue eyes, brown eyes experiment has caused a lot of controversy, but also has given us a lot of information about psychology and the way that our minds work, the way that our social structures work, and a peek into racism. So I want to read an article by Stephen G. Bloom, and it's in the on the website called The Conversation, which their tagline is academic rigor, journalistic flair. And we're going to take a look at the article is entitled A Second Look. A second look at the blue eyes, brown eyes experiment that taught third graders about racism. The killing of George Floyd on May 25th, 2020 was a seismic event, a turning point that compelled many Americans to do something and do it with urgency. Many educators responded by holding mandatory workshops on institutional racism and implicit bias, reforming teaching methods and lesson plans, and searching for ways to amplify undersung voices. As a journalism professor and author of a book on race that spans more than 50 years, I've watched these developments with great concern. We've been here before with unsettling and disturbing results. The assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968 was also an event that spurred educators to action, motivating one teacher to try out a bold experiment touted to reduce racism. The experiment took the nation by storm. The day after King's murder, Jane Elliott, a white third grade teacher in rural Riceville, Iowa, sought to make her students feel the brutality of racism. Elliott separated her all white class of students into two groups, blue eyed children and brown eyed children. On the first day, the blue eyed students were informed that they were genetically inferior to the brown eyed students. Elliott instructed the blue eyed kids not to play on the jungle gym or the swings. They wouldn't be allowed second helpings for lunch. They'd have to use paper cups if they drank from the water fountain. The blue eyed children were told not to do their homework because, even if they answered all the questions, they'd probably forget to bring the assignment back to class. That's just the way blue eyed kids were, Elliott told the students. On the second day of the experiment, Elliott switched the children's roles. After the local newspaper published a story on Elliott and the experiment, she was flown to New York to appear on May 31st, 1968, on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, where she extolled the experiment's effectiveness in cluing in her 8-year-old white students on what it was like to be Black in America. A darker side. But Elliott's experiment had a more sinister impact. To most people, it seemed to suggest that racism could be reduced, even eliminated, by a 1 or 2 day exercise. It seemed to evince that all white people had to do was learn about racism. To learn about racism was restrain themselves from an impulse to engage in made up cruelty. They needed not acknowledge their privilege or reflect on it. They didn't need to engage with a single Black person. But in reality, I found in researching for my book, Blue Eyes, Brown Eyes, that the experiment was a sadistic exhibition of power and authority, levers controlled by Elliott. Stripping away the veneer of the experiment, what was left had nothing to do with race. It was about cruelty and shaming. Subsequent research, designed to gauge the efficacy of Elliott's attempt at reducing prejudice, showed that many participants were shocked by the experiment, but it did nothing to address or explain the root causes of racism. The roots of racism and why it continues unabated in America and other nations are complicated and gnarled. They are steeped in centuries of economic deprivation and cultural appropriation. The nonstop parade of sickening events, such as the murder of George Floyd, surely is not going to be abated by a quickie experiment led by a white person for the alleged benefit of other whites, as was in the case of the blue-eyed, brown-eyed experiment. Sought after diversity trainer. Nevertheless, Elliott became as famous as a teacher could become in America. The 1970s and 1980s were ripe for diversity education in the private and public sectors, and Elliott would try out the experiment at workshops on tens of thousands of participants, not just in the US and Canada, but in Europe, the Middle East, and Australia. She traveled to corporations, banks, prisons, schools, and military bases. Thousands of educators across the United States folded the experiment into their curriculums. She was a standing room only speaker at hundreds of colleges and universities. She appeared on the Oprah Winfrey Show 5 times. Unsettling insults. Elliott turned into America's mother of diversity training. The anti-racism sessions Elliott led were intense. To get her points across, Elliott hurled insults at workshop participants, particularly those who were white and had blue eyes. For many, the experiment went horribly awry. In doing the research for my book with scores of people who are participants in the experiment, I reached out to Elliott. At first, she cooperated with me, but when she discovered that I was asking pointed questions of scores of her former students, as well as others subjected to the experiment, she made an about face and said she no longer would cooperate with me. She has since refused to answer any of my inquiries. Scores of others did participate. I interviewed Julie Paziniak, who had been working for US West, a giant telecommunications company in Minneapolis. She was hesitant to enroll in Elliott's workshop, but was told that if she wanted to succeed as a manager, she'd have to attend. Paziznik joined 75 other employees for a training session in the company's suburban Denver headquarters in the late 1980s. Right off the bat, she picked me out of the room and called me Barbie, Pazizniak told me. That's how it started, and that's how it went all day long. She had never met me, and she accused me in front of everyone of using my sexuality to get ahead. Barbie had to have a Ken, so Elliott picked from the audience a tall, handsome man and accused him of doing the same things with his female subordinates, Pazizniak said. Elliott went after Ken and Barbie all day long, drilling, accusing, ridiculing them, and make the point that whites make baseless judgments about blacks all the time, Pazizniak said. Elliott championed the experiment as an inoculation against racism. Questioning authority. The mainstream media were complicit in advancing such a simplistic narrative. They embraced the experiment's reductive message as well as its promised potential, thereby keeping the implausible rationale of Elliott's crusade alive and well for decades, however flawed and racist it really was. Perhaps because the outcome seemed so optimistic and comforting, coverage of Elliott and the experiment's alleged curative powers cropped up everywhere. Elliott was featured on nearly every national news show in America for decades. Elliott's bullying rejoinder to any non-believer was to say that however much pain a white person felt after 1 or 2 days of made-up discrimination was nothing when compared to what blacks endured daily. Back when she introduced the experiment to her Iowa students more than 5 decades ago, at least one student had the audacity to challenge Elliott's premise, according to those who were in the classroom at the time. When she separated the class by eye color and announced that blue-eyed children were superior, Paul Bodensteiner objected at every turn. "It's not true," he challenged. Undeterred, Elliott tried to appeal to Paul's self-interest. "You should be happy. You have the right color eyes." But Paul, one of 8 siblings and the son of a dairy farmer, didn't buy Elliott's mollification. "It's not true and it's not fair, no matter what you say," he responded. I often think about Paul Bodensteiner. How can we teach kids to be more like him? Is it even possible today? So that is a scathing indictment of the experiment. And I have always had reservations about the ethical nature of exposing 3rd graders to such an experiment without any preparation, without any controls, without any kind of scientific experiments, mods, without any kind of scientific processes at all. But I do want to also then take a look at ecologies. There's an article in Ecology by Amelia Sinclair, and if you separate from the ethical nature of the experiment itself, and take a look at the psychology of it, I think it does give us some insight into how racism becomes rampant, and how our minds justify our behaviors. So let's take a look at this one. This one's called Dividing by Color: The Impact of the Blue Eyes, Brown Eyes Experiment by Jane Elliott. The blue eyes theory influenced the infamous blue eyes, brown eyes experiment conducted by the educator Jane Elliott back in 1968, profoundly influenced our collective understanding of social prejudice and discrimination. This pioneering exercise aimed to simulate the effects of racism by dividing participants based on an arbitrary characteristic, eye color. By examining the methodology, findings, and implications of the experiment, we can gain crucial insights into the dynamics of discrimination, the psychology of prejudice, and the power of experiential learning. What is the blue eye theory, methodology, and design? Jane Elliott designed the blue eyes, brown eyes experiment to demonstrate the arbitrary and irrational nature of racial discrimination. Conducted initially with her third grade classroom in Riceville, Iowa, the experiment involved dividing all of the students that she had access to into two separate groups based on their eye color, blue-eyed and brown-eyed. On the first day, Elliott designated the blue-eyed children as being superior, granting them special privileges and encouraging them to discriminate against the other brown-eyed children in the group. The brown-eyed children were then subjected to various forms of mistreatment, such as sitting at the back of the classroom and wearing collars to signify their lower status. The next day, Elliott reversed the roles, designating the brown-eyed children as superior and the blue-eyed children as inferior. This role reversal allowed all students to experience both sides of discrimination and privilege within a controlled environment. Elliott observed the interactions and behaviors of the children throughout the experiment, noting changes in their attitudes, performance, and self-esteem. This experimental design allowed Elliott to simulate the effects of systemic racism and explore the impact of arbitrary discrimination on individuals' behavior and self-perception. Blue and brown eye theory, key findings. The results of the blue eyes, brown eyes experiments were both revealing and transformative for educational psychology and social justice. Elliott found that the children quickly adopted the prejudiced behaviors associated with their designated status. Those labeled as superior exhibited increased confidence, performed better academically, and engaged in discriminatory behavior toward their peers. Conversely, those labeled as inferior displayed lower self-esteem, poorer academic performance, and heightened anxiety and distress. These findings highlighted the powerful influence of social conditioning and authority on individuals' attitudes and behaviors. The experiment demonstrated that even arbitrary distinctions could create deep-seated prejudice and discrimination, leading to significant psychological and emotional consequences. It underscored the idea that discrimination is a learned behavior and that societal structures and authority figures play a crucial role in perpetuating biases. The blue eyes, brown eyes experiment provided compelling evidence that prejudice and discrimination are deeply embedded in social dynamics and can be easily manipulated through authority and social conditioning. It emphasized the need for critical awareness and education to combat these destructive behaviors. Psychological mechanisms and implications. The experiment illuminated several psychological mechanisms underlying prejudice and discrimination. One key factor is the role of authority and social conditioning, where individuals adopt behaviors and attitudes endorsed by authority figures and societal norms. In the test, Elliott's authoritative role as a teacher significantly influenced the teacher's acceptance and enactment of discriminatory behavior. Another important mechanism is the concept of in-group and out-group dynamics, where individuals develop strong affiliations with their perceived group, while harboring negative attitudes toward those outside the group. In the blue eyes, brown eyes experiment, the arbitrary division based on eye color created a sense of in-group cohesion and out-group hostility, mirroring the dynamics of racial discrimination in broader society. These insights have profound implications for understanding the dynamics of prejudice and discrimination. The findings emphasize the importance of addressing societal structures and authority figures that perpetuate bias and promote inclusive and equitable environments. They also highlight the potential for experiential learning to challenge and change discriminatory attitudes and behaviors. Blue eye theory ethical considerations. While the Blue Eyes, Brown Eyes experiment provided valuable insights into prejudice and discrimination, it also raised ethical considerations related to the potential psychological impact on the participants. The experiment involved subjecting children to simulated discrimination and mistreatment, raising concerns about the potential distress and long term effects of the exercise. Modern ethical standards prioritize minimizing harm and ensuring the welfare of research participants. Researchers must obtain informed consent, provide thorough debriefing, and ensure that any induced behaviors do not have adverse long term effects. The ethical considerations surrounding the Blue Eyes experiment have contributed to the development of stricter guidelines to protect participants while advancing scientific knowledge. Broader societal impact. The insights gained from the Blue Eyes, Brown Eyes experiment have significant implications for various fields, including education, social policy, and diversity training. Understanding the dynamics of prejudice and discrimination can inform strategies to perform inclusivity, equity, and social justice. In education, recognizing the psychological impact of discrimination underscores the need for curricula and teaching methods that challenge biases and promote empathy and understanding. Educators can use this knowledge to create inclusive learning environments that celebrate diversity and foster positive relationships among students. In social policy, the findings highlight the importance of addressing systemic discrimination and promoting policies that support equality and inclusion. Policymakers can use this knowledge to create initiatives and programs that combat prejudice, promote diversity, and ensure equal opportunities for all individuals. In diversity training, the insights from the Blue Eyes, Brown Eyes experiment emphasize the potential for experiential learning to challenge and change discriminatory attitudes. Organizations can use this knowledge to develop training programs that raise awareness about bias, encourage self reflection, and promote inclusive behaviors. Theoretical contributions. The Blue Eyes, Brown Eyes experiment has made significant contributions to psychological theories, particularly in understanding the impact of social conditioning and authority on prejudice and discrimination. It provided empirical support for the concept of in group and out group dynamics and highlighted the role of societal structures in shaping individuals' attitudes and behaviors. The research also contributed to the broader discourse on social psychology, emphasizing the importance of creating supportive and inclusive environments that promote equality and challenge discriminatory practices. By elucidating the mechanisms underlying prejudice and discrimination, the Blue Eyes experiment has informed theoretical frameworks and research on social identity, authority, and the impact of discrimination. Blue Eye Theory Conclusion. The Blue Eyes, Brown Eyes experiment conducted by Jane Elliott remains a cornerstone in the study of prejudice and discrimination. Through innovative design and rigorous methodology, the experiment revealed the profound psychological and emotional impact of arbitrary discrimination, challenging societal norms and contributing to pivotal social justice efforts. As we reflect on the legacy of the Blue Eyes experiment, its lessons continue to resonate in various fields, from education to social policy to diversity training. The research highlights the importance of addressing and challenging discriminatory practices and social conditioning to promote inclusivity and equality. It underscores the significance of thoughtful and ethical approaches to studying and addressing the complexities of prejudice and discrimination. The enduring relevance of the Blue Eyes experiment attests to its significance in the ever-evolving field of psychology. Its contributions to our understanding of prejudice and the impact of discrimination provide valuable guidance for creating conditions that promote positive social change and equal opportunities for all individuals. Ultimately, Blue Eyes, Brown Eyes experiment serves as a powerful reminder of the intricate interplay between social dynamics, authority, and discrimination. Now, going back to the earlier article, I do think that there is something to be said about just taking an experiment like that, that's only 2 days long, with third graders with no preparation and no processes in place, and then just making a very big blanket assumption that this is how racism functions, and that simply exposing people to the racism is how you cure it. That being said, I do think that we learned quite a lot from the Blue Eyes, Brown Eyes experiment. We learned that it does not take a lot. It does not take a lot. And in both of the articles, they talked quite a bit about the role of the authority figure in how intensely the the people who were participating in the experiment were feeling the outcome of the experiment. Jane Elliott's the fact that she kind of spoon fed to the kids that were superior, how they were to behave and how they were to act towards the kids that were inferior, certainly played a role. I believe that a lot of those kids may not have come up with some of the ideas that she gave them. So there's definitely a role in the authority figures towards how people are expressing their racism and their prejudices. Now that leads me to the current state of things in this fucked up country. And that is that our government has worked really, really hard, and it has taken decades for our government to come to a place where we recognize that there is a systemic problem of racism, misogyny, homophobia, transphobia that makes it darn near impossible for people of marginalized communities to get ahead unless we address it from the top. A lot of work was done over a lot of decades to move us in the direction of diversity, inclusion, equity, and accessibility. Our current administration, the current totalitarian, authoritarian, fascist regime, in the stroke of a pen, has undone decades of that work. There's an executive order that I talked a little bit more about in another video that that sought to eliminate anything having to do with DEI or DEIA, and is aggressively at the moment working to ensure that DEI and DEIA programs, that anybody having anything to do with that, not only do they lose their federal funding, but now they're being threatened with lawsuits for promoting illegal ideas and ideology, which is a terrifying place for us to be right now. We should not be in a place where promoting diversity and equity and inclusion and accessibility is illegal. That it's disgusting and it's terrifying. We have to keep doing the work. We have to keep recognizing that it is a systemic problem, and we have to keep moving toward a world where we don't have to do experiments like this to try to teach people how to stop being racist. I'm Snarky Positivity. I always end on a positive note. The positive note is this: we are still doing the work. There are still people doing the work. And while they can try to make it illegal to implement DEI initiatives, they cannot stop people from doing the work. They cannot stop us from fighting racism. They cannot stop us from doing the inner work, like you're doing right now, which is learning about what's going on inside of us. And if we can address what's going inside of us, then we can start really doing the healing, not only healing of our own racism, but healing systemically and healing communities of marginalized peoples. Anyway, that's my 2 cents. Thank you for hanging with me today. If you enjoy the content, please subscribe. I am working to build up my YouTube subscriber base. I am also hoping to go live sometime in the near future. So thank you again for your support. Okay, bye.